I've seen a lot of government trying to solve problems, and it didn't work. And my view is the right course for America is to have someone who understands how the economy works, who will passionately get America back on track.
All right, we're going to come back to the question of obstacles to the nomination, but let me get to policy, Governor Huntsman. This is, by all accounts, an age of austerity for this country, a jobs crisis, also a spending crisis in Washington. I wonder what specifically you would do to say to Americans, these are cuts I'm going to make in federal spending that will cause pain, that will require sacrifice.
Let me say, first of all, with respect to Governor Romney, there are a lot of people who are tuning in this morning, and I'm sure they're terribly confused after watching all of this political spin up here. I was criticized last night by Governor Romney for putting my country first. And I just want to remind the people here in New Hampshire and throughout the United States that I think he criticized me while he was out raising money for serving my country in China. Yes, under a Democrat, like my two sons are doing in the United States Navy. They're not asking what political affiliation the president is. I want to be very clear with the people here in New Hampshire and this country. I will always put my country first, and I think that's important to them.
All right, well, why don't you get a response, Governor Romney, and then I'll come back to you on the austerity question.
I think we serve our country first by standing for people who believe in conservative principles and doing everything in our power to promote an agenda that does not include President Obama's agenda. I think the decision to go and work for President Obama is one which you took. I don't disrespect your decision to do that. I just think it's most likely that the person who should represent our party running against President Obama is not someone who called him a remarkable leader and went to be his ambassador in China.
This nation is divided, David, because of attitudes like that. The American people are tired of the partisan division. They have had enough. There is no trust left among the American people in the institutions of power and among the American people in our elected officials.
All right.
And I say, we've had enough, and we have to change our direction in terms of coming together as Americans first and foremost and finding solutions to our problems.
Let's not be superficial. Let's talk substance. So, Governor Huntsman, name 3 areas where Americans will feel real pain in order to balance the budget.
Well, I would have to say that I agree with the Ryan plan. I think I'm the only one standing up here who has embraced the Ryan plan. It's a very aggressive approach to taking about $6.2 trillion out of the budget over 10 years. And it looks at everything. And what I like about it is it says there will be no sacred cows. Medicare won't be a sacred cow. Department of Defense won't be a sacred cow. As President of the United States, I'm going to stand up, and I'm going to say we are where we are. 24% spending as a percentage of GDP. We've got to move to 19%.
3 programs that will make Americans feel pain, sir.
Well, let me just say on entitlements, across the board, I will tell the upper income category in this country that there will be means testing. There are a lot of people in this nation who don't need some of the benefits.
Social Security and Medicare.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And also, I'm not going to tie Department of Defense spending to some percentage of GDP. I'm going to tie it to a strategy that protects the American people. And if we think that we can't find efficiencies and cuts in the Department of Defense budget, then we are crazy.
Senator Santorum, same question. 3 programs that would have to be cut to make Americans feel pain, to sacrifice if we're going to balance the budget.
I would agree with Governor Huntsman with the means testing. I talked about that in Hollis yesterday. We had about 1,200 people there, and I walked through and talked about how we have to make sure that we're not going to burden future generations with a Social Security program that's underfunded. It's underfunded right now. And we have to take those who have been successful, who are seniors, who have a tremendous amount of wealth, and we got to reduce benefits. It makes no sense for folks who are struggling right now to pay their payroll tax, which is the biggest tax. It's tax on labor. It makes us uncompetitive. And the idea that some on the left would have to raise those taxes to make labor even more uncompetitive for those working people who are trying to get a job to subsidize high-income seniors doesn't make any sense to me. Food stamps is another place. We've got to block grant it, send it back to the states, just like I did on welfare reform. Do the same thing with Medicaid. Those 3 programs, we got to, including housing programs, block grant them, send it back to the states, require work, and put a time limit. You do those 3 things, we will help take these programs, which are now dependency programs, which people are continually dependent upon, and you take them into transitional programs to help people move out of poverty.
Speaker Gingrich, on the issue of Medicare, when you were on Meet the Press earlier in the year, you had talked about what Paul Ryan was talking about as a step too far, which is moving seniors onto a premium support or a voucher program, depending on how you phrase it. As you know, Senator Santorum thinks that current seniors should be moved off of that program into premium support or a voucher program. Do you agree with doing it that quickly and making current seniors bear the brunt of that?
Well, the fact is that the Ryan-Wyden bill, which was just introduced recently, actually incorporates allowing people to choose and allows them to stay in traditional Medicare with the premium support model or go to new methods. And I think it's a substantial improvement because it allows for a transition in Medicare in a way that makes sense. But, David, you know, I find it fascinating that very, very highly paid Washington commentators and Washington analysts love the idea of pain. Who's going to be in pain? The duty of the president is to find a way to manage the federal government so the primary pain is on changing the bureaucracy. On theft alone, we could save $100 billion a year in Medicaid and Medicare if the federal government were competent. That's $1 trillion over 10 years, and the only people in pain would be crooks. So I think a sound approach is to actually improve the government, not punish the American people because of the failure of the political class to have any sense of cleverness.
Governor Perry, from Facebook, a lot of questions, as we mentioned, have been submitted. And this from Martin Montalvo, because we do have a spending crisis, but also a lot of people hurting. He writes this: with more Americans on government assistance than ever before, is it un-American for Americans to feel relieved when the government helps them?
Well, let me answer the question that you asked earlier. What are the three areas that you would make some reductions that people would feel some pain? And I would tell you it would be those bureaucrats at the Department of Commerce and Energy and Education that we're going to do away with.
And that's your final answer.
But, you know, the fact of the matter is that Americans want to have a job. That's the issue here. And the idea that there are people clamoring for government to come and to give them assistance is just wrongheaded. And that's what we need to be focusing on as a people, is how do we create the environment in this country where the entrepreneurs know that they can risk their capital, have a chance to have a return on the investment, and create the jobs out there so people can have the dignity to take care of their families. That's what Americans are looking for. I've done that for the last 11 years in the state of Texas and have the executive governing experience that no one else up here on this stage has.
All right, I'm going to leave it there. We're going to take a quick break. We are going to come back live from New Hampshire with many more questions for the candidates and feedback from you. So please participate online at mtp.msnbc.com. We're coming right back to New Hampshire. We are back on this special edition of Meet the Press from here in New Hampshire. We want to get right back to the questions here with our candidates. And before the break, we were talking about Medicare. Paul Ryan, Senator Santorum, had a plan where he'd like to move seniors off, give them a voucher or premium support, and then they would take care of their health care from there. There's a lot of debate about that. And I mentioned, you said, seniors should be affected right now, 55 plus, have them affected right now, which has been somewhat controversial. You wanted to respond to that.
Well, you know, I hear this all the time when I've been campaigning around the state. You know, we should have the same kind of health care that members of Congress have. Well, that's pretty much what Paul Ryan's plan is. The members of Congress have a premium support model. So does every other federal employee. I mean, it works very well. As you know, the federal government has a liability. They put money out there, and then if you want, you have about this thick, if you're an employee in Washington, D.C., you've got a whole bunch of different plans to choose from, and you have all sorts of options available to you. If you want a more expensive plan, you pay more of a co-insurance. If you want a less expensive plan, you don't. But here's the fundamental difference between Barack Obama and everybody up here. It's whether you believe people can be free to make choices or whether you have to make decisions for them. And I believe seniors, just like every other American, should be free to make the choices in their health care plan that's best for them.
Governor Romney, there's a lot of discussion this morning on Facebook about taxes. And as we talk about taxes and spending, Of course, we talk about economic security and economic growth. There's been a debate in Washington and beyond, as you well know, between Warren Buffett and Grover Norquist. Grover Norquist, the anti-tax crusader who says no tax increases under any circumstances. Warren Buffett says, hey, the wealthier in this country can pay more, and they should pay more. Indeed, balancing the budget is a way for more economic growth down the line. Who knows more about the American economy, Grover Norquist or Warren Buffett?
Well, who knows more about tax policy? I'm not sure that we're going to choose from the two of them, but I can tell you this. The right course for America is not to raise taxes on Americans. I understand that President Obama and people of his political persuasion would like to take more money from the American people, and they want to do that so they can continue to grow government. And the answer for America is not to grow government, it is to shrink government. We've been going over the last 20, 30, 40 years. Government keeps growing at a faster rate relative to inflation. We've got to stop the extraordinary spending in this country. That's why I put out a plan that reduces government spending. I cut programs, a whole series of programs. By the way, the number one to cut is Obamacare. That saves $95 billion a year. Return, just as Rick indicated, return to states a whole series of programs, food stamps, housing vouchers, Medicaid, and then set how much goes to them. And finally, with regards to entitlements, in the entitlement reform area, I do not want to change Medicare and Social Security for current retirees. But for younger people coming up, they have to recognize that in the future, higher income people will receive less payments of the premium support program.
Governor Huntsman, who knows more about the American economy? In addition to that question, you seem to be a little bit uncomfortable with a moment from earlier in this debate cycle when everybody said that they would reject even a 10-to-1 ratio of cuts to new taxes.
It was a silly format. I mean, it was an important question, and they asked us to raise our hands. I mean, for heaven's sake, we didn't even get a chance to talk about it. I put a tax reform proposal on the table endorsed by the Wall Street Journal that goes farther than anybody else is on this stage. It calls for what absolutely needs to be done, and everybody knows about it. We are so chock full of loopholes and deductions. It weighs down our tax code to the tune of $1.1 trillion. You can't compete that way. It gives rise to lobbying on Capitol Hill that needs to clean up. We've got to phase out loopholes and deductions in total, and we've got to say so long to corporate welfare and to subsidies, because this country can no longer afford it, and we've got to prepare for competition in the 21st century.
Speaker Gingrich, if you become President Gingrich, and the leader of the Democrats, Harry Reid, says he's going to promise to make you a one-term president, how would you propose to work with someone like that in order to achieve results in Washington?
I think every president who works with the leader of every opposition knows they're working with somebody who wants to make them a one-term president. I mean, you know, that's the American process. I worked with Ronald Reagan in the early 1980s. Tip O'Neill was Speaker. He wanted to make Reagan a one-term president. We had to get one-third of the Democrats to vote for the Reagan tax cuts, and we did. As Speaker, I was negotiating with Bill Clinton. He knew I wanted him to be a one-term president. And we got a lot of things done, including welfare reform, because you have to reach. I agree with what Governor Huntsman said earlier. You have to at some point say, the country comes first. How are we going to get things done? We'll fight later. Let's sit down in a room. Let's talk it through. I'll tell you what I need, and I'll tell you what I can't do. You tell me what you need, and you tell me what you can't do. And it sometimes takes 20 or 30 days. But if people of goodwill, even if they're partisans, come together, talk it out. You know, we got welfare reform, the first tax cut in 16 years, 4.2% unemployment, and 4 straight years of a balanced budget with a Republican speaker and a Democratic president. So it can be done with real leadership.
Anybody else have a point of view about how you actually work with the other side when they've committed to working against you, Governor?
Yeah, I mean, I was governor of a state that had a slightly Democratic-leaning House and Senate. My legislature was 85% Democrat. And I went around at the very beginning of having been elected and met with the Speaker of the House and the Senate President. The Senate President said something I won't forget. He said, Mitt, the campaign is over. The people expect us to now govern for them. And we did. We met every week. We rotated in offices. We got to know each other personally. We developed a relationship of respect and rapport, even though we disagreed on a lot of issues. And when crises arose, as they did time and again, we had a severe budget crisis. I went to them and said, will you give me unilateral power to cut spending without even a vote of the legislature? They had enough confidence in me, they decided to do that. And I was able to cut the spending on an emergency basis, not just slow down its rate of growth. We can work together. Republicans and Democrats are able to go across the aisle because we have we really do have areas of common interest, even though they're dramatically different perspectives on how the world works and what's right. We can find common ground. And I have proven in a state that is very Democrat that I'm able to work with people, 19 tax cuts, protected charter schools, drove our schools to be #1 in the nation, kept them there, rather. That record can work with Republicans and Democrats who are willing to work together.
Dr. Paul, there's this question of argument versus accomplishment. The question again comes from Facebook. Heath Treat writes, Paul Treat, rather. I want to know what Ron Paul's plan